Hello, and welcome to my bedroom. Today we're going to talk about something pretty awful, anxiety. But ladies and gentlemen, before we get into today's video, I am very excited to announce that I have been sponsored. And so today's sponsor is Wren. Wren is a website that makes it easy for anyone to start taking climate action. By answering a few questions about your lifestyle, you can find out your carbon footprint and how to reduce it. You can then make a monthly contribution to fund carbon reduction projects like rainforest protection and mineral weathering, thus offsetting your carbon footprint. You like pigs, huh? You like fluffy pigs? Well, you'll never guess. You'll never guess what they're using in Scotland as a part of their mineral weathering project. That's right. These guys are using woolly pigs as well as various technologies such as crushed basalt in the soil to help speed up Earth's natural carbon cycle, and it's super neat. And the first 100 people to sign up using my unique link will have an additional 10 trees planted in their name. So a huge thank you to Wren for reaching out and sponsoring today's video. And without further ado, let's talk about anxiety. Whether you struggle with anxiety, someone you know struggles with anxiety, or you have no idea what it is and you wonder why it's such a big deal, this is going to be an incredibly important video for everyone. Anxiety is something like a silent plague. While you may look around and everyone seems to be going about life as usual, under the surface, more people than ever are silently suffering, and most people don't even know why. So we're going to talk about it. What is anxiety? Why should you care? My personal experience with it, and how I went from not being able to leave my bed to drinking Bang Energy like it's sparkling water. So no matter who you are, I hope you stick around and that this video is of some use to someone. Let's begin by clearing up some of the common misconceptions about anxiety. The main difference between anxiety and fear is that fear is your biological, your natural response to threats that are occurring right now, things you should be focused on, worried about, and attempting to prevent or overcome. Anxiety is a fear of things that have not happened. It is a fear of things that are not real. You are anticipating a threat that has not occurred. Because of this, it can be healthy in small doses, like before taking a big test or before needing to wake up early to go to work. So anxiety can actually be helpful and is natural in healthy doses. When it becomes an anxiety disorder is when it becomes uncontrollable and when you start to feel anxiety about things that you really shouldn't be. How can you identify whether it's healthy or not? Well, we're going to discuss that when we get into types of anxiety. Social anxiety, this affects 7.1% of people in the United States. I will leave my citations in the details of the video. This is the anxiety revolving around interacting with other people, whether it is large social gatherings, one-on-ones. It is the unhealthy amount of stress and fear regarding those situations. Generalized anxiety, which affects 2.7% of people in the US, is an anxiety regarding usual daily life things, day-to-day tasks that should otherwise not be causing you existential fear and suffering. Panic disorders, which also affect 2.7% of the US population, is the condition where you are randomly plagued by panic attacks. Now, panic attacks differ from anxiety attacks because they come out of nowhere, whereas anxiety attacks are kind of like someone follows you home, someone goes into your closet and you see their shoes under the thing, and then they jump out and surprise you. That surprise, that climax, that highest point of the anxious feeling is the anxiety attack, right? And while it sucks, it makes sense because it has been built up over time. Panic attacks are when you suddenly experience that high level of anxiety out of nowhere, and it is unwarranted, and you do not know when it's going to happen. A panic disorder is when you get those frequently and randomly. Phobias, this is the most popular form of anxiety. 9.1% of the population deals with this. This is when you have anxiety regarding a specific thing usually brought on by a traumatic event. Some people have a phobia of dogs. Some people have a phobia of like food poisoning. Phobias are a generally more rational form of anxiety, though it is still unpleasant and unhealthy. Interestingly, because of the subject of many of my more popular videos, I've become something of a spokesperson for Generation Z, despite the fact I look like I could be any of their creepy uncles. And so because of this, I have to address how this is affecting my generation specifically. Again, my generation being Gen Z, I am only 21. Did you know that 31.4% of teenagers between the ages of 13 and 14 have an anxiety disorder? What about 32.1% between 15 and 16? Or, big shock, 32.3% of people between the ages of 17 and 18. Pretty much anyone who's been on the internet in the past couple of years would not be surprised that I believe it's probably a much higher percent of people that struggle with anxiety. And so now we get to talk about my experience with anxiety. And if you don't care, yes, there are time codes, but you know, I would say check it out because it's pretty dope. It's pretty sick nasty. It's pretty bussing to hear about how awful it was for me, and then how hopeful and exciting it was that I have made progress. And you can go down the comments and you can say, I'm glad you made progress. You know, you're looking so handsome today because of how far you've come from where you were. So what happened? Well, it all started when I kind of had a series of unfortunate events, if you will, wherein I violently and painfully vomited due to a multitude of reasons, an absurdly frequent amount of times within a very short time frame. One such experience was food poisoning, another one was a flu or some sort of stomach bug, and then a couple of other just crappy unidentified causes. And because of this, I started to develop a phobia of vomiting because these experiences, for whatever reason, were incredibly painful. These experiences were so violent and so painful that the trauma of it was carved into my mind and caused me to develop a phobia. And then this phobia of vomiting led into a phobia of uncooked food, so I stopped eating meat. I started getting nervous that my fresh produce had E. coli or any baked goods. If the flour wasn't cooked, I looked up that apparently that can have E. coli. And I noticed that my anxiety was making it incredibly difficult to spend time with friends and family because the entire time I was nervous that I was going to, for some reason, vomit in front of them. This developed into a sort of form of social anxiety, and so I started to remove as many responsibilities from my life as I could because I thought the fewer stressors I had, the less likely I was to have a panic attack. Although, interestingly, the more things that I removed, the more panic attacks I had. Until eventually, I spent all day in bed. I decided not to take up a job over summer break, and I didn't have any homework I had to do, and I wouldn't leave my room. And merely waking up you know, breathing was enough to give me several panic attacks and horrible anxiety in between those. And so maybe some of it was anxiety attacks, maybe some of it was panic attacks, but the point was things were going very poorly for me. And thus began my 3-year life-changing battle against anxiety. One major change that I noticed with this severe struggle against anxiety was that my personality changed quite a bit. Whereas growing up till essentially sophomore year of college, I was an incredibly confrontational, incredibly confident, incredibly dominant type A personality. After I was struggling with anxiety, I noticed I became incredibly submissive. I had a very low opinion of myself because I was incapable of doing lots of ordinary things that I think a lot of other people weren't struggling with. But I couldn't do them because everything gave me a panic attack. And with these struggles, I also noticed that my hope in the future for myself got a little worse. In college, you are figuring out what you're going to do for the rest of my life. And I started to not weigh these things by what am I good at? What am I capable of? What do I want to do with my life? And instead change my thinking to be, what is the safest environment that I can be in that will not induce a panic attack, and that will not make my anxiety so bad that I will not be able to work. I also noticed a lot of behavioral changes. Insomnia. I had an incredibly difficult time falling asleep. Sometimes I would sleep only after staying awake until as late as 5 a.m., which was especially awful for me because I always noticed that my anxiety was worse at night. Because I was always on the verge of having an anxiety or panic attack, I had to keep my heart rate down. This meant that I couldn't listen to most of the music I enjoyed because what would have excited me or, you know, pumped me up or made me feel happy and energetic, whatever, would actually just stress me out and make me feel like I was going to vomit and then die. This was also the case with movies. Not just horror movies, which I used to adore. In fact, I would watch horror movies on my own, whatever time of day I felt like it, because I just thought they were fun. Suddenly, I couldn't even watch PG-13 action films or anything that I felt was overly stimulating. This was the case with television, video games, anything that got my mind moving a little too fast, I had to completely abstain from. Hanging out with friends was not something I really ever wanted to do. And in fact, having friends over often led to panic attacks, which sort of reinforced this fear of spending time with people. If you watch my Why is Anime So Divisive or whatever it's called video, or my most recent Halloween special, fun fact, before both of those videos, I had an anxiety attack, and actually during the Halloween video, I was having an anxiety attack. So you can watch those and see how well I covered it up. I am very good at that. I also had a lot of side effects. I lost over 35 pounds over the course of a few months. No, it was not because I was working out. No, it was not because I was eating healthy. It's because I was eating nothing. I thought everything was going to give me food poisoning, and my stomach always hurt so much that I never had an appetite. My 20th birthday, where I had about 10 friends come do karaoke with me, I actually missed a lot of because as soon as I had to do my first song, I ended up having to rush to the bathroom, where I remained for a great deal of time trying to convince myself not to throw up and convince myself that I wasn't dying. My sister's wedding. After the ceremony, I spent almost the entirety of the rest of the night in the bathroom. And the last thing was really interesting because I have always been a pretty upbeat person. I would consider myself to be an optimist. I would consider my default emotional state to be joyful. And yet, anxiety brought upon the first experience with depression that I had ever had to struggle with. I mean, it made sense that I was depressed. Every second that I was lucid, I experienced immense amounts of psychological suffering as well as physical suffering that manifested from this psychological torment. I almost always felt nauseous. I always had a stomach ache, acid reflux, heartburn, things like that. And I started to wonder, how do you live life? How do you go about existing when the only emotion you really feel is soul-crushing fear? But there's a hopeful message at the end of this, so if you are experiencing that, please watch to the end. Or if this is too much for you, please skip to the part where I talk about it getting better. Regardless, anxiety ruined a lot of things for me. It was very lame and it was very hard to control. So I'm not a professional, obviously. I am not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist. I am merely a man whose life was almost ruined by anxiety, and after years of searching for an answer, I have found many methods that I have used to take my life back. How did I get through it? Well, I'd first like to talk about what doesn't work. I went through 5 different types of prescription drugs. I went through Prozac, right? Prozac? Yes. Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, Zoloft, and then the final one was Effexor. Most of these either did nothing or actually made it worse. And the difficult thing with prescription drugs is that they all affect everyone pretty differently because it just depends on the chemical makeup of your brain. There are also a lot of accounts of people who found a prescription drug that worked for them, but after a certain amount of time, their anxiety returned and they built up some sort of a resistance to it, and then they had to increase their dosage. This was a process that would repeat for some people until eventually they reached the maximum dose that you can be prescribed. My thoughts on the matter is that it's because the drugs don't address the problem. They cover up the problem kind of like with other substances. But if you need some sort of relief just to instill a sense of hope and control back in your life, I 100% recommend talking to probably a psychiatrist, because they actually are trained to diagnose mental health issues and give you the prescription drugs that they actually think will work best. Primary care physicians are not trained specifically in those areas, and so they will just prescribe you what they guess is probably the best. Now, I'm sure there's more science that goes into it, but you're much better off talking to a psychiatrist. I also went through 3 different therapists. The first one I saw was a gal who specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on repairing your thought process and associations with traumatic events, and helping you to rethink back over some things in a more positive light. After about 1.5 years, it started to feel like I was just getting the same tips from her as I would have found online, and the only thing that she specifically provided was an ear that I could say whatever I want to, and it wouldn't affect my personal life. The next guy I saw for about 4 or 5 months specialized in exposure release therapy, which is getting you to deal with things that you find traumatic or anxiety-inducing in small doses to build up an immunity with it, and reinforce the idea that these things that make you anxious are not as harmful as your brain is telling you they are. And I don't think it was a problem with his style of therapy, but his approach to it. It ended up feeling very corporate and disconnected. This therapist was missing that personal touch that I was looking for from a therapist. It didn't feel like he understood me or was listening to me. It felt like he was just waiting to hear keywords so he could give me a specific specialized handout that I could read and fill out. The last guy, I don't know what type of therapy he specialized in, but I only saw him 3 times because after that 3rd time seeing him, I felt so encouraged and so prepared to face real life again that I didn't really need to talk to him. In fact, the 3rd time I talked to him, he called it a victory lap because after the 2nd one, we had made so much progress. The 3rd one was just kind of a checkup to make sure everything was still going well. So I would 100% consider reaching out to a counselor or a therapist if you are able to. Please bear in mind that people in your personal life, parents, friends, family, as much as they might have your best interests at heart, it can often be very difficult to be completely honest with them. And when you are completely honest with them, you might not end up getting a helpful response. So a trained professional is a good idea, I think. Now let's talk about the things that did work. One of the most important things was changing my mind from thinking about mental health issues as an illness rather than something that I need to actively work on to overcome. I had taken a very passive approach to anxiety and hoped that with these little methods like breathing and counting things in the room, which do a little bit help in the moments where you are having a panic attack, in the long term, they do not fix your issues. You can't just wait for a panic attack to happen, try to cope with it, and then hope that it never happens again. You need to take steps to strengthen yourself, face your problems, and reprocess the roots of your anxiety. My 3rd therapist told me a story about a tennis player who was a professional. He was one of the best in his league, and he went against someone who was relatively new and incredibly young. However, the new young person beat him. And in an interview, they asked him, how is this possible? You shouldn't even have participated in this game. How did you win? And in that interview, he said, I play and practice as though I am the best tennis player, because I know I am. Time simply hasn't caught up with me yet. And when you recontextualize this story as a way of thinking about anxiety, it is incredibly helpful, knowing that the person who will overcome anxiety in the future is the same person that is dealing with it today. You were not a different person before you struggled with anxiety. You were the same person you are now. And in the future, when you do overcome it, you will not be killed and then cloned and then replaced. It is still you. And so face your anxiety as though you are someone who has already overcome it, as opposed to what if. Anxiety trains us to think of everything, what if something goes wrong? But instead, we need to train ourselves to live as if. Live as if things are going to go well. Live as if you have already overcome anxiety. That is a mouthful. The most important thing I learned was how avoidant behavior actually makes your anxiety infinitely worse. This is why people who develop anxiety over time actually become less and less active, and their anxiety doesn't get any better. This is because our brain is hardwired to seek out emotions that provide good feelings. When there's something you have to do and you're stressed out about it and you decide, I'm just not going to go, your body is filled with a feeling of relief. This is something that your body craves. And it makes the connection that because you felt anxiety, you were more inclined to avoid doing that task that you didn't want to do. And by avoiding that task, you were able to experience that positive hormone. So then the next time you have to do something, your body is going to make your anxiety a little bit worse, so that you are even more inclined to say no, so that you feel that sense of relief even quicker. And this will continue to happen more and more until eventually your body makes you feel so much anxiety all the time, you never want to do anything, but there's nothing left to say no to, so you don't feel that feeling of relief anymore. So your job is to shoo away your body and say, no, I'm not going into autopilot. No, I'm not letting you take control. I'm the captain. I steer the ship, and I say we're going to Geralt's, pinata party, even though I don't feel like it. And so the next time you're invited to Geralt's pinata party, you're not going to feel as anxious because you survived the event and everything went perfectly fine. And the more that you say yes to things, the more that you take on responsibility that you know you can handle, the more capable you will become, the more competent, the more confident, and the less anxious about these things you'll be. Another thing you can do is set aside some sort of time to experience quiet. A lot of people who struggle with anxiety have a really, really hard time with silence, because in that silence, they cannot distract themselves from the anxiety they're feeling and the negative thoughts that they're having. However, the fact that you're not allowing silence and you're not allowing yourself to process these negative feelings and emotions and thoughts, that is why it has been hard to sleep at night for you if you struggle with this, because that is the first time that you're not being distracted, and so you're going to be kept up by all these things that you should have processed during the day. And so what are you going to do in this time of silence? That's so boring. Well, a couple of things you can do. One, my favorite, is journaling. Write down your thoughts. Ask yourself some questions, write down the answers to those questions. The more that you listen to what your mind has to say, the better you can understand yourself and be familiar with yourself. This will help you to become more comfortable in your own mind. When your mind is a scary place filled with fear and suffering and a lack of control and uncertainty, you're not going to have a happy life. And that's what anxiety is. Another thing you can do that I found to be incredibly useful for those of you that like this sort of thing, creative writing. Write a story. What I did was I wrote a story that had my friends in it, and it had me in it. You know what I learned when I wrote myself as a fictional character? I needed to process what my character arc should be. And that included a resolution to my internal and external struggles. And that was stupidly eye-opening. Being able to put down on a piece of paper, all right, here's one thing I struggle with. Here's something I'm self-conscious about. Here's like some safety behaviors that I try to do. And all right, well, what if we, took some of those away? Or what if we stretch these to their limits? How do I end the story for this guy that is me? And then the things that I came up with as resolutions to my character arc were things I could actually do in my real life. You can also meditate, which is, it's not necessarily the practice of thinking of nothing. It's about the practice of controlling what you do think about. So, you close your eyes, you focus on deep breathing, you count your breaths, and then you allow like one thought at a time that, is kind of buzzing around your head. You pluck one, and you work through that thought and you process that, and then you feel a little bit better about it. And then you go back to breathing, and then you go, I'm ready for another thought. You grab one more thought. But it's really a practice of learning to control your own mind, which is super duper duper helpful. I would recommend the app Headspace. They have guided meditations that you can do. And I'll leave maybe like a link to that or something in the description so you can try out one of those. All in all, anxiety sucks. Super, super, super bad. And, even if it's completely awful for you right now, it can be something that you can learn to control and manage so that you can live life again. Now I know what to do when my life starts to fall apart again. And that has filled me with so much hope, and it has revived my joy of living and my perceptions of the future. And I really hope that some of the information in this video is encouraging to you, and will hopefully, if you are struggling with anxiety, help you to make some positive progress and hopefully take back your life as well. And if there are people in your life that are struggling with this, pass on the information. Be there for them, remind them that their life isn't over, and that they're not alone, and that many people have struggled with what they are currently struggling with and made it out just fine. And if you don't struggle with anxiety and no one you know struggles with it, hopefully this broadened your perspective and sympathy for people who do struggle with it. It's very real. It's not made up. I know some people think that some mental health things are like fashionable or a cultural thing. And while they can be influenced by culture, the suffering that people go through because of these mental health disorders is not for looks. If there are things in this video that you think I missed, if you have your own personal tools that you want to share, if there's clarification on anything that you would like to discuss with me, comment away. The floor is now yours. Really, and I will be around to look at those comments, and I might not respond to everyone, but I probably will. Hope you enjoyed this. This is not my typical content, but I hope it was cool anyway. And as always, have a good one.